And we're back on another edition of Talking Together. This time, we're talking about what does transportation look like in the post-COVID-19 world, or like I like to say, AC, after COVID-19 or after coronavirus. We're joined by the one and only Keith Benjamin, the Director of Transportation for the city of Charleston, South Carolina. And before we started this interview, Keith was like, I've been interviewed by you 8 years ago, and has times and people changed. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. It's always good to chop it up with you.
It's good to chop it up with you too. And there's so much to talk about, Keith. I think first, before we go into the future, let's talk about the status quo, right? Because I think what you hear a lot from the big cities. So you're hearing from de Blasio, you're hearing from Lori Lightfoot, you're hearing from the big mayors and from the big city administrators, from the big city officials, but you're not really hearing from mid-sized cities, smaller cities about what the impact of COVID-19 is having on their infrastructure. So you are a director of a middle-sized city in the southern part of our country. What impact is COVID-19 having?
Well, it's hit us in a significant way, and just as it has all over the country. But I think one of the things that's been key throughout is the leadership that's been there. And our mayor was the first one to step out there and say this is something that needed to be a priority. The first one to step out there and say, to stay at home. And so his leadership has been key in terms of not just for us as a region in the Low Country, but dare I say the state in terms of dictating how we think about our dealing with COVID-19, but how we're also being accommodating to our business community, to our residents, to those who are marginalized, who are sometimes not thought about, and even to the workers of our city, and just making sure that everybody is as safe as possible, but that we're keeping the city business moving as much as possible too. And so that's a delicate balance, but his leadership has been just extremely crucial in getting us to where we are today.
That's wonderful to hear, because I think, like I said, you hear so much from the big cities that nobody's thinking about. The majority of Americans live in middle-sized to small-sized towns and cities across this country. And nobody's telling their story. Nobody's talking about what's happening on the ground there. And so I'm happy you were able to sort of shed some light on that. Now, let's sort of change focus a little bit, really, to have a conversation about the impact that the current COVID-19 crisis is having on transportation. Big net, we're going to get into transit in just a second, but transportation, because nobody really thinks about that impact either, right? Like, mind you, we know that our Amazon packages are coming on time, so that means I guess the roads are working, but what's really going on?
Yeah, I think that's crucial, and one of the things that's been important for me is taking care of the folk who are on the front lines who are working all the time, right? I have over 60 employees who work at our department, who do everything from our parking enforcement to maintain our signals to our public right-of-ways to our markings to our signage, and they're doing this work day in and day out. And the dependency on them continuing to do that work is crucial. I also have the privilege, thanks to our mayor, to be the city's representative in most of our varying areas of transportation regionally. So I sit on our aviation board, our Carter Transit Board, and our Tri-County Council of Governments. And so we, before COVID-19, have been at this major precipice point about how we dictate transportation within our region and what exactly that looks like. We have a massive amount of growth. Our population growth rate is 3 times the national average. Our job growth rate is 4 times the national average. Millennial population has jumped by 60% in the last decade. And so we have a lot of growth happening down here. And so the conversation has always been about transportation, about mitigation, about how that layers in with resiliency and affordable housing. And so we had a lot going on and still do have a lot going on with regards to transportation, a $400 million bus rapid transit system that's going to go over 20 miles from Summerville, South Carolina, all the way into our downtown area where our medical district is. And we just were awarded a federal grant through the BUILD grant process, a $20 million bike and pedestrian bridge that's going to connect West Ashley, our most populous area, with our medical district. And so we were in a place where transportation has been changing and is going to continue to change. And so, COVID gave us a bit of a pause. Obviously, you don't have as many people on the roads and otherwise, but it's kind of given this space with a number of different cities to think about what the public right-of-way should look like, what safety looks like, but also what accessibility looks like for everybody. we're a member of the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and getting a chance to exchange with other department heads over DOTs around the country has allowed us to see that people are thinking about what our city looks like and what it should be for the future. And so this is not just a pause for us. Obviously, with the stay-at-home aspect, it's important for people to maintain social distancing. But it's this opportunity to say, what should the public right-of-way look like? Who should have access? And how do we make sure that access is for everybody, no matter what mode of transportation?
And let's go back just a little bit because I want to talk about that. So there are these conversations happening with directors of departments of transportation all across the country about what the world looks like in this, which I think is the sort of the broader sort of note to this conversation, right? Is what does the world look like in the post COVID-19 world? We are so used to packed buses. We are so used to, and every city's different, right? But what does the world look like in a social distancing environment? What does the world look like in a world where in a lot of places, we're talking about low income folks or low income essential folks who are riding the bus to and from work
Yeah.
to pick up their students, young people riding the bus to and from school. What does that world look like now currently? I mean, a lot of things are closed, but essential employees still have to get to work. So let's deal with that first, and let's talk about what it looks like in the future after we sort of, as business begins to reopen.
Yeah, I think we have to be conscious of the fact of the privilege of choice that so many folk do have in this COVID-19 time of to be able to work from home or to be able to make varying different decisions about how they care for their children or how they still maintain their livelihood. That's not always the case for everybody, right? For a lot of people, their ability to get from point A to point B, they don't have choice. They only have a option, and that option might be walking. That option might be taking a bike. That option might be using a transit system. And so it's been imperative to us that we're not taking away that access for people and what exactly that looks like, right? I live in a city where we're number one in the state for bike and pedestrian death and injuries, right? We have a transit system where over 70% of our riders make $45,000 or less. Right? Our backbone to our economy is food, beverage, and hospitality, and we've seen how those businesses and those employees have been just devastated over the last couple of weeks. Less than 20% of those folk live in our downtown area. And so if you don't have a car, you're relegated to other modes of transportation to be able to get to work, even if you still have your job. And so it's been imperative to us to be critical thinkers in what access looks like. I think it puts the equity question in front of every city's face. We had a situation where our transit system, which has done an amazing job, made some critical decisions about what the system would look like to make sure the system was continuously going. And in the midst of that, we realized that there was a route that needed to be put back into place so that our Rosemont community could be able to get to the food line off of King Street. There were so many people in that community that were transit dependent that was their way to be able to get to the grocery store. And thankfully, we were able to adapt to make sure that was the case. And so it definitely puts the equity question front facing. And so as we think about the future, and I really want to get to that, it's not just simply about those who can afford, those who can make choice, what their future in transportation looks like, right? It's thinking critically about how we're making holistic transportation decisions that benefit everybody and not just some.
Now, I think people forget a lot of times when they think about transportation is that transportation workers are also very essential. So we're talking about bus drivers, we're talking about folks who are even Uber drivers for that matter, people who are part of what has become our modern day transit system. Are transit workers getting the resources that they need to maintain their safety and their health during this period? And what are the mechanisms that are being put in place in the future to ensure that these workers stay healthy? Because let's be real, if there is a COVID outbreak at the bus depot, that whole bus depot goes down.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I got to give a shout out to our Tri-County Council of Governments, our DC POC that oversees our transit system and those folk there and transit. The work that they've been doing has been amazing in how they are making sure the buses are cleaned daily and supporting those workers that are there. And here at the city, That's been important for our on the ground staff, our field staff who are out and about on a regular basis. As I said before, I have signs and marking crew members, I have signal crew members who, if something happens at an intersection as it did earlier last week, they got to respond, and they have to be able to make sure that people are still able to get to and fro. And their dedication, the work that they do day in and day out, is crucial. And so we've been adamant as a city to make sure that folk have the safety precautions that they need, the PPE that they need. We have an emergency management team that is just amazing, that has been working through those parts. And so that coordination has been essential. And you see that indicative all throughout the city, all throughout the country. So many other colleagues that have spoken with that city staff, municipal government has stepped up in a significant way to say that we want to keep our cities moving, but we also want to protect our workers too. And I think that that's been crucial.
And listen, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this interview, right? Because I think what's missing from this conversation is a lot of times you see the president every day on these pressers, you see these governors out there, but truth of the matter, and when it really comes down to it, what everyday Americans are seeing, the people that they're seeing who's helping them deal with this outbreak are municipal government employees. City
Yes.
and local employees are the people they see on the food line. It's the people they see that pick them up in the morning for the bus. It's the person that they see if they're applying in the if they're applying for unemployment insurance. These are the people they see. They're not seeing Donald Trump. They're not seeing Nancy Pelosi. They're seeing local government workers who are doing the best job that they can, and they're doing exceptional.
Yes.
Which brings me to my next question, right? Because I think that's sort of the conversation that's missing. But so how has the lives of local municipal employees changed since COVID started? And then I really want to have a conversation about what the future looks like in transit. But let's talk about that first.
Well, I think the biggest thing has been ensuring that they are as safe as possible as they're completing essential services. And that's where the leadership of our mayor has been so important. He's had that at the top of the list of, we know we need to figure out how to keep city services going as much as possible. But in order to do that, we have to protect our workers, and we have to make sure that they're there. And so there's so many different parameters, thanks to our HR staff, our emergency management team. I feel like I'm in military because I know exactly what I'm supposed to do and on what days and how to function and what to transfer. But we are moving in that regard. Our coordination amongst all of our department heads, we're meeting daily, and we're transferring over to our teams, our management, and otherwise throughout the week, just making sure that folk are on par and that we're doing the services of the city to make sure that our citizens are still safe, that their garbage is still being picked up, that we're responding to malfunctioning intersections, that we're making sure that our homeless are taken care of, and those who need to be housed are housed, that we are making sure that we're still doing all the business that a city should be doing, but making sure that our workers are safe. And that's been amazing to see how, at least for our city, how we've come together and work towards those efforts.
Now, dream with me for just a bit, brother. So now, as we think about post COVID-19, right? And let's talk from a national perspective. You have experience working with transit workers. You now manage a city transportation system, infrastructure, all of that. We are moving into a society where the ideal of packing into a train car is almost unfathomable at this rate, right? Like nobody's thinking about that. The idea of packing into a bus, nobody's thinking about that at this rate, right? I mean, I think people are even leery about the idea of getting into an Uber, right? So God forbid getting into an Uber pool. So what does, in your mind, from your perspective, somebody who's been in this industry for almost a decade or more than that, what does the future of transportation and transit and mass transit look like?
Well, I think it's going to look different from place to place, right? You have some cities where this has been a part of their fabric of their functionality, and this is something that the dependency on it from any person, no matter their spectrum, is there. But you have cities like ours in the small to mid range, where we are attempting to place transit as a central baseline of how people move. We understand that in our region, that we can't build roadways and bridges out of our congestion issue, out of our growth issue. It's just not going to work. We have a couple of more places. There's a handful of other places where that's being looked at. But pretty much after that, it's what we had. But after a study that was done in 2015 about different alternatives for us down there, we found that transit was that answer, and bus rapid transit would look like that, not just for the dependent riders, but also for choice commuters and otherwise. And we don't feel that that notion is going to change, right? We know that it's going to be a culture shift for us here. Something like COVID-19 adds another layer of challenge with that. But we know with the combination of the congestion issues that we have, the growth that we're seeing, the need to be able to support both commuters and local riders in a significant way, that people are going to need options. We recently did an entire economic study for our West Ashley area. Most people, when they think of Charleston, they just think of the Peninsula Historic area, but it's 5 distinct boroughs that our city is made up of. West Ashley has the bulk of our population. When they were surveyed, we found that over 84% of those residents leave West Ashley every day in their individual car as one person. That's not sustainable. The same people.
But now, hold on a second. So if a majority of those folks leave their community as in an individual car every day to go to work, to school, to play, right? You're now saying, and that's not, we can agree that in the pre-COVID world, that's not sustainable. In this post-COVID world, you guys are saying we need to create mass transit, but how do you convince these riders to get on a bus when we know that getting on a bus could potentially get them sick? I mean, I think this is the dilemma that transit departments are faced with all across the country.
Well, I think it's more about, and the other part that I was saying is, of those people who were surveyed, over 60% of them said they would choose another mode of transportation. They knew it was reliable, safe, connected, and affordable, right? Our goal in our place of the country is not about just saying no more cars. It's about saying that people need to have choice, and a part of that choice addresses some of the transportation struggles that we've had. And so some of that might mean people using transit daily. Some of that might mean that they're linking modes of transportation together and what that looks like. And so I think that we will be able to get to a place where there's a sense of normalcy about how we get from point A to point B. I think that's going to be a combination of the successes of the medical community, the way in which we approach ensuring safety of our citizens, and then moving from there. But I can attest that pre-COVID-19 and post-COVID-19, I will continue to hear from citizens saying, look, address this congestion issue, fix our transportation issue, make it easier for us to get from point A to point B, make it safer for us to get from point A to point B. And our current condition as to how we function transportation-wise doesn't answer those questions. And we have to think.
Sure. I mean, so I think I think that is sort of, I think the dilemma, not even dilemma, I think the challenge, right, that transportation directors all across the country will face, because no matter where you go, whether you're here in Washington, D.C., where we're based, or you're in Charleston, congestion is a problem. But how then do you mitigate? The only way to mitigate congestion is to have more folks in one form of transit, right? So you put them on a bus, you put them on a train, you put them in your carpool. But in all those situations, you put people closer together, which is what we were told not to do, right? Which is what in this current environment. So this is what I mean. I think this is sort of.
That's why I think the combination of the successes of the medical community, play a significant role. Part of the efforts that we're doing around social distancing, around the PPE and otherwise, is the exposure rate and the fact that how contagious this unfortunate disease is, right? And so the solutions that come out in the medical community, I think, will put people more at ease, and then open up back to the level of normalcy that we would like to see. So we're seeing those effects in so many different ways. Even in the case of we just had our aviation board meeting yesterday, and we're seeing effects at our airports as well, right? And there's going to be that combination of the success in the medical community, the trust factor that's going to have to be built with our citizens as we try to figure out how to make sure that they're as safe as possible in the due diligence we're doing on a regular basis.
I mean, I think it's just a very profound question, Keith.
Yeah.
It just really is. It's just because I think this is which comes first, or the horse or the cart, right? Because it's just like, if the role of mass transit is to put mass people on one form of transportation, how do you do that in a world where we're told we have to stay 6 feet apart? And if you're staying 6 feet apart, you can't all get on the same city bus, right? And I think this
Yeah.
is the challenge that you will have to deal with in the next coming months as we get pushes to reopen this government and reopen this economy.
No question about it. I think the other part of it, though, is that there's so many people who have continued to make our economy move in this COVID-19 scenario that don't have a choice, right? That this is the way that they're able to get to their basic needs, to be able to serve their community, to be able to gain their livelihood. And the efforts that we're making here and now to make sure that those folk are safe, that they're able to gain their livelihood, provide for their families, be able to serve their community in the ways they want to, is the same level of intentionality that we're going to have to take once our communities are fully opened up.
That's great. Now, one more question for you before you go. So Charleston is also home to one of the larger ports on the East Coast that brings in a lot of goods and produce and products to to America. Is
Yeah.
the port being impacted by COVID-19? Nobody's really talked about that either.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be fair and say that from a governing standpoint, the state port authority is the governing entity, so the city doesn't oversee it. Our port has been amazing. It's the fastest growing in the country, fourth largest on the East Coast, ninth largest in the country.
And
Companies
what
like
is it, like 1 in 5 folks who live in Charleston have some job connected to the port? Is that
one in
accurate?
11, yeah, 1 in 11, yeah, and it's significant. Companies like Volvo, Mercedes, BMW, every X series BMW in the world comes through those ports, and so the influence there is heavy. And I know that they've been doing their due diligence for what exactly that looks like and how do they make sure the economy keeps moving. There's a lot of different industries, and especially in the Low Country, that are dependent on that port and its efficiency. And so I know that they've been doing their due diligence.
Well, you have a tough road to hoe ahead of you as we try to figure out how what the future looks like in this post COVID-19 world as we're currently in it, right? And I thank you and all those thought leaders who are really having these conversations about what getting on a bus looks like or what getting an Uber pool looks like. So I appreciate your work on this, my brother, and thanks for joining us on Talking Together.
Of course, man. I always appreciate getting a chance to talk with you. And anytime that we talk about transportation, I'm always there. But this is something that I'm grateful that there's an army of thought leaders and people who are working on the ground day in and day out to support each other and thinking these things through. And we're going to have to walk it together.
Oh, absolutely. Listen, and Keith knows this, but if anybody who doesn't know me, I'm a huge transportation buff. That is one of the secrets to Richard, is that I love transportation. And one of my favorite policy sectors is transportation. Why? Only the good Lord in heaven knows. Keith, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Come on to the team, man. Come on to the team.
It's good to see you, sir.
Same, man. You be good.